Hello, I'm Toycat, and good morning everyone. The big story everyone seems to be talking about is the reshaping of the global economy, but the much bigger story for most Europeans is going to be around fish. That might seem like a silly story, but this headline sums it up. The UK-EU Defence Pact really does depend on fish. This is something that Europe has warned repeatedly, but it does seem to be true, and something the UK has a very interesting opinion on. Why are the UK and the EU beefing so much over fish, and how can this possibly relate to defence? Today's video talking about the kind of continuing on this series of talking about the fundamentals of international relations. We'll dive at least a little bit into that. So let's start with the basics. The UK left the EU, and as part of leaving the EU, that means we don't just leave the single market for people, but it also means we leave the single market for resources, which means that in the all of the EU shares the common fishery policy, which means all of their waters are all of their waters, but not the UK's anymore. This is notable because even though the EU is much bigger by land area, the UK is an island and so has a giant amount of sea and therefore a giant amount of fish. This is something that some countries, let's be honest, countries including France, it's France in particular, are particularly upset about, and it's something that causes some issues because they would like to hold up a big deal, which is currently being done, to do with defense between the two countries based on this. And I think to be really broad about both these things, from the EU's perspective, the EU used to own all of these waters, and the UK used to be a part of that. Isn't it kind of unfair that they don't anymore, especially given individual fishers would have been making their living from sailing from France into British waters? Isn't it kind of unfair they can't do that anymore? And from the UK perspective, no, it's a natural resource that is part of our country. We would imagine us saying that we wouldn't sign a defense deal with you unless we could come into northern France and chop down your wood. It'd be like asking to go into Norway and steal their oil, or going to Belgium and have some of their chocolates, because it's our chocolates too now, or going into France and taking some of your people who will burn down the streets at the slightest inconvenience to their life. It's one of those examples, right? Of like, yeah, actually, you probably shouldn't say that something as important as defense we both agree on should be beholden to something that only you agree on, but that actually is what's going on. If we read this interview from the Jessica, a Swedish EU affairs minister, they said that to make fast progress on a formal security arrangement, they need to make sure that the other parts of the deal get worked out, involving sensitive issues, which the biggest one is access to British waters for European fishing fleets. A deal on fish would help in building trust, and they say that, yeah, it's really important to work on defense and security, as everyone from both sides do. As you might have heard, there are some issues with one particularly big member of NATO right now. But yeah, basically she agrees that it's important to work together. However, even though, even though it could be possible to complete a defense pact first and then move on to negotiating fishing rights, she said, I think we have to work out a way where we can do both because we want to move ahead with the defense partnership, but for many countries, it's important to solve the other issues as well, so we have to make steps when it comes to fisheries and other topics. You might be wondering to yourself right now, why would you tie a deal about fish to one about defense? So broadly speaking, the UK doesn't agree that fisheries should be shared or any deals should be done because we, again, at least compared to any one EU member, have a stronger hand there. And indeed, if you think about it this way, the UK doesn't want to access fishing stocks in the Gulf of Bothnia. Bothnia, maybe? I've never really thought that this body of water would have a name, but we don't really need to access fishing over there because we have a large amount of our own, whereas France has far less fishing waters than us, and so the inverse right is kind of more fair. Dealing with fishery rights is one we're not really that big on, whereas defense is something that both sides are pretty evenly agreed on. So the reason for that is that the UK is the world's 5th largest military, one of the world's nuclear powers, and notably, even though as the smaller member of this partnership, is much further away from where the threat actually lies, all the way on the east. And so basically, the UK and the EU both agree, yeah, a security partnership would be good. If anything, you could argue it's better for the EU than the UK, but the reason that it's not actually all that way is because, as it says right here, kind of buried that you might not have heard about, the EU is about to spend $150 billion in loan, giving EU governments the ability to spend on rearming, and those funds need to be invested on a buy more European basis. This is something the US doesn't like as a big arms exporter, and it's something that the UK thinks, oh yeah, we are a European country, we sell lots of weapons, but right now we'll be locked out of that scheme unless we sign this agreement. So we're effectively saying, yeah, the security for Europe is an important thing, we'll sign up for security for Europe, and I guess if that means we supply some of your guns, then so be it. But we also think that signing a defense pact where we're effectively agreeing to defend you, you agree to defend us, something we both agree on, shouldn't be dependent on something we both don't agree on. So why would that come up? The answer is brinkmanship. And it's important to mention this because effectively this is what the US is trying to do on everything overall. If you're willing to say, look, I will hurt us both unless you give me a little something, the rational move, at least in game theory, is to just give them the little something. You're familiar with the prisoner's dilemma on this one? If you both try to be irrational and you both are willing to hurt yourself just to make sure the other person can't gain, then you both lose. And so the problem with the prisoner's dilemma is when there's multiple rounds of this, and when, say, the US knows that they can continuously extract concessions from their neighbors because Canada's economy is much more reliant on the US than vice versa, and so if the US hurts both of them, they get hurt way less than Canada. The same is true for Mexico, which is why quietly in the background, the Mexican president has been kind of going along with a lot of Trump stuff, and it's something that is a really good strategy in the short term, but in the long run it tends to damage relations and make you a less reliable partner. At least it depends on how you want to see those things. In the long run, if you're a big enough partner, you can get away with it because everyone needs to have a deal with you eventually. And so this is something that the UK and the EU are basically going through by themselves. The EU could reasonably assume if there was something the UK wanted so bad, right, that let's say the UK was about to be invaded, and unless we could sign the security agreement, we would be, we'd lose, Skegness to the Russians, because that's where they're coming first. They're going to assume that they've already nuked it when they get there and they see what it looks like. Exclusively mean to Skegness in these videos because I had an ex-girlfriend's family who took me there, and it was I woke up very early and had a very, very meh time. They're gonna get there and they're gonna be like, well, I guess this must be where we're planning to attack first. But anyway, so the point is when Russia tries to invade Skegness, and we know it's happening in 24 hours, signing this pact would be such a good idea that we'd be like, okay, go on then, sure, have access to our fishing waters. It will suck to lose that 0.04% of our GDP. We were planning on regrowing our fishing stocks, but whatever, you can just go do your thing. But when it's a mutually agreeable thing, the problem is that the UK might and has just decide to walk away and say, okay, we would like a defense pact, but we're not going to tie it to some unrelated thing. And again, from the EU's perspective, they're saying, look, you guys used to be a member, and so if you want to have near member-like privileges, you've got to have near member-like costs. And if you're not contributing to our budget anymore, that sure does suck. You can contribute to our budget via the access to, if you want access to our market, we want access to your market, specifically just off the coast of Skegness. I'm not going to bring up Skegness anymore. I'm sure there's wonderful things there. I hear there's an Audi that's square, and so it's sponsored. Yeah, I don't know why the Audi feels the need to advertise on Google Maps. Are there people who are scrolling Google Maps who are like, you know what? I wasn't going to go to Audi till just now. Anyway, so the point here is brinkmanship is a dangerous game that effectively the UK and the EU have started. Well, the EU is playing and the UK is going, we're not playing that, which is probably the right move to make. With fairly equal partners, you can get that done, whereas with, say, the US, it's a bit of a problem. Although, I do want to quickly point something out. So right now, you can see, well, this is the wildest thing. It's happening as I'm recording this video. Basically, Trump is, because I wanted to edit this one, so I'm recording it the night before. He's unveiled this ridiculous list of who's getting tariffed the most. Interestingly, you can see Vietnam is sitting there at 90%, whereas the UK is sitting at just 10%, apparently. Wow, that's very nice. They charge us, we charge them. How can anyone be upset? Effectively, 90% of what Trump says is like domestic political rhetoric, but every now and then there is a little point in there about like, oh yeah, even though everyone's talking about how tariffs are this or that, actually non-monetary barriers are the worst ones. And so you could argue, I always have to play this devil's advocate when something bad happens because it's what I do. You could argue actually by putting a monetary barrier on the trade to match the non-monetary barrier, they can say, look, you can't say that you want to buy our paper if we're not allowed to buy your wood, for example. In effect, saying, because, a tariff is Saying you'll charge us 25% if we buy your wood is something, but saying, oh yeah, we will only buy paper from countries that do paper in a certain way. The non-monetary barriers are a real threat to global trade, and global trade is something I'm going to make just one last little case for in this video, because global trade and indeed global defense agreements are more or less the same things. It seems wild to say, but the reason the EU was formed as the European Coal and Steel Community was because France and Germany kept going to war, and how do you prevent that? Make the economy so interlinked that war is unthinkable because it won't work. This is the World Trade Organization's biggest goal and its biggest success. Invading your neighbor is brutal and has so many downsides, even for Russia right now, right? Like, sure, they've gained 20% of Ukraine and they've told them off for being bad boys, but has the price been worth it? Most Russians probably are saying no to themselves, and that is the goal. Everyone in the world should be looking at what's happening and saying, ooh, if we trade less, that means that makes it easier for us to attack each other, which is bad, because we want, if I can have one dumb normie take here, it's that global peace is a good thing, probably a good thing worth fighting for, and hopefully that's something we can do without trying to extract economic concessions out of each other. By the way, speaking of economic concessions, does have to be said, I think we mentioned here, 10%, you know, also look, it's there's a printed copy that was handed out. 10%, pretty good, right? I think we're the lowest on this chart, alongside Brazil and Australia and Turkey and Colombia. Look at that, go UK. Oh, actually, wait, no, it's UK. It's actually the reverse. So they're arguing the UK charges the US a 10% tariff, and so they're applying a 10% back. So actually it's Singapore, Australia, Turkey, and Colombia. I got the numbers mixed up there. But yeah, what's really interesting, and Brazil too, actually. So we just mixed up Singapore. Oh no, it's the exact same list. They're arguing that the tariffs are now going to be reciprocal, and that's very interesting. But yeah, I guess my basic point on either case is, my whole point of this channel about the UK's position is that we've needed to work out for a while how to deal with the US in a time where that is very challenging, and how to deal with the EU. And weirdly enough, right now we're having more issues with the EU than the US, which is bizarre, right? But if we can just nail down both these things, as a country, we'll hopefully be doing pretty well. I actually feel bullish about the UK. I'm not like the wildest pro-Starmer person you'll ever meet, but I am pretty impressed of the direction of travel the UK is going in, and that's kind of nice. Speaking of direction of travel, here is the thumbnail from Tuesday's video about Marine Le Pen, and I showed two very different thumbnails, but they got such similar watch time shares, and this is such a common thing. When you make different thumbnails, you expect to see different results, right? You expect to see results that are kind of staggeringly different, maybe even, but if we look right here, you can see like 49.9 versus 50.1. There's such tiny differences that I kind of want to see what the highest difference we can actually get is. So here's the thumbnail I actually want to use for this video. You know, the EU wants their big salmon from the UK, but the UK is saying, no, you can't just take our salmon. So this is the real thumbnail. I think it's a decent one, has a fun little Minecraft reference for some of you out there. And this is the A/B test I'm going to be doing of it. I think it's a pretty nice one. I think I might label it and be like, you know, if you click this. Actually, that might tempt people. But you know what? I'm going to make this the thumbnail for the video. The basic plan here is this should be the most unappealing thumbnail possible. I mean, it might be more unappealing if we make, like, black as the background. No, that might be too appealing. I want to make this the worst looking thumbnail possible. And so that's what we're going to do. I'm going to draw my little blue pin here. And so here's my question for you, chat. How lowly viewed will the lowest thumbnail be? Because my theory right now is that people don't actually click based on the thumbnail. Over a large enough period of data that seems to be true, but on the small ones it isn't. So there's my blue pin, like my thumbnails have. Here's my pie chart to represent you if you click this video. And, oh wait, there we go. And yeah, here is my delightful A/B test. What's gonna win? You let me know. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the minor editing on this video. Let me know if it added something to record it the night before, because I'll see you in the next one, you